Coming up on Over a Barrel.
Prices today are still about 8 cents above where they were a year ago. So there's probably still a lot of people that may be looking at the price today saying, I don't feel like this is real good.
Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to Over a Barrel. I'm Matt McClain alongside Patrick DeHaan. And make sure that you like or subscribe to the channel right here on Over a Barrel. We are so glad to have you along. You can also submit your questions or comments to us as well. Patrick, give us all that information.
That's right, Matt. Shoot us an email to podcast@gasbuddy.com. Whether you have a question or something like you'd like to hear on a future episode, shoot us an email there, or you can interact with us on Twitter or X. I'm at GasBuddyGuy. Matt, you're Over a Barrel, Matt. And of course, the show is Over a Barrel Show on Twitter. You can find us there on Facebook as well. Matt, it's great to be with you another week. I'm excited. I was watching the numbers today, and they're looking fairly good.
Yeah, so we've got all kinds of stuff going on here as of the recording of this particular podcast. The Federal Reserve has decided, for the most part, that they are going to rule out an interest rate hike. Stock markets certainly seem to like that as of the close. They have decided to leave the rates steady. And they have made some notes about a lack of further progress on inflation. So that means that the federal funds are at 5.25% to 5.5%. That's basically where we've been since July of last year. And so kind of what's going on with all of that, especially when it comes to inflation, it looks like crude oil might be getting, and or gasoline prices might be getting a little bit of the blame for that. So kind of break all of this down for us and see where we are going with all of this.
Yeah, Matt, as you mentioned, some good news. The stock market really jumping on Jerome Powell's comments that the next move in interest rates would probably be a cut, not an increase. Stock markets like that. The good news, too, was oil prices really tanked today. In fact, as we sit here, West Texas Intermediate crude oil back below the $80 a barrel mark. In fact, it briefly touched below $79 a barrel, but as we sit here at this moment, that's right about where we are. And the good news, Matt, for those that are filling their tanks up, right, we can talk till we're purple in the face about oil, but as many folks know, it doesn't always translate into lower gas prices, but gas prices declining even more than oil, down 4%, while oil was down 3.5%. So the price of RBOB gasoline, that's reformulated blend stock for oxygenate blending, that's what RBOB means, down 11 cents a gallon. So, Matt, I think the coast is becoming more clear that the national average has potentially peaked. Now, of course, a caveat to that, hurricane season could be a bit busy, but it looks like the coast may be starting to clear, that gas prices have peaked and could start coming back down.
From your lips to everyone's ears at this particular point, prices on the decrease would be a fantastic situation. We are looking at all of these different, aspects. Mostly because gasoline, fuel, diesel, all of that has such a direct impact on everyone. Everything from a can of corn on the grocery store shelf, because somebody's got to get it shipped to that grocery store. And of course, shipping costs are factored into that price point, right down to you and myself and anybody else that has a vehicle which uses fuel. You gotta stop by the gas pump and put it in there. So it has a trickling effect on every layer. So this could be a very good aspect. Are you really thinking, barring any kind of geopolitical thing out there that we all know there's plenty of hot potatoes to play with there and toss about, but barring anything out there geopolitically across the globe, are you thinking that we've kind of hit the point?
I grow a little bit more confident every day. Now, hindsight's always 20/20, of course. So, as we stare at it, it's a little hard, but getting the feel of the market, and that's where the experience is drawn on, right? The experience to feel the markets out I feel like, the market has tried to rally a couple times and it's failed. That basically is telling us that there is a ceiling. It's even harder for the market to now break out over some of those numbers. It's a technical, you can look at it from a perspective of technical trading, that if a price of a commodity, a stock, fails to breach a certain level several times, there's going to be more and more resistance. Just like, Matt, how you're probably more and more skeptical that prices are going to go up if it hasn't happened once. So technical trading is something that we look at in an instance like this, where the RBOB price has failed to break out above its April 12th high. So yeah, I'm becoming more and more confident that gas prices have peaked. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to immediately plunge either. But at least for now, looking at gas buddy data, the peak price was on April 19th. The national average was 369. We're down to about 366. So I think most places, Matt, have probably seen their peak. But there are some places like the West Coast that are still above average risk. And by the way, I saw some comments on social media today that prices in Dallas jumped and in Florida jumped. Those are both areas where we see price cycling. That is, prices tend to drop for a week or two. They make a big jump back up. Then they start trickling back off. Those price cycles, by the way, happen every 1 to 2 weeks in a handful of states. The Great Lakes, Florida, Dallas, markets like St. Louis. And those price cycles will keep happening every 1 to 2 weeks. But I think for the rest of us, Matt, yeah, the coast is starting to clear. The clouds are clearing. Whatever else you'd like to say here, but it's looking like gas prices have peaked, at least for now.
We are in the month of May. We are in that particular month where schools across the country, most of them end for the school year around this time of year. That kind of brings into high gear some of the vacation plans, a lot of traveling that'll be taking place. So what are you kind of thinking with regard to gas prices? If we're hitting our peak now, are you thinking that, some of the vacation plans, as far as budgetary concerns for travel expenses, might not be too terrible? I'm just going to hold my breath and hear your answer.
Well, when it comes to budgeting, unless people saw our 2024 fuel outlook, which, we distributed in late December, what I will say, Matt, is a lot of people just kind of say, well, I'm going to guess that this year's going to be like last year, right? And that's not the best way to go about it. If you saw the 2024 fuel outlook, that would give you a lot of insight in what you can expect at the pump this summer. But for those that haven't, Matt, prices today are still about 8 cents above where they were a year ago. So there's probably still a lot of people that may be looking at the price today saying, I don't feel like this is real good, but it's really not too far off the mark. But again, how many times have you and I said that this year is going to feel a lot like last year? So if you were okay last year, you'll probably be okay this year. If you skipped a road trip last year and you're hoping for another year of prices that are more affordable, well, this might be your year to hit the road.
Boy, I am hopeful. As you know, I do a lot of traveling. So I am a little bit more alert, sensitive. Take your adjective and explain it away when it comes to me as much as you wish when it comes to gas prices, because I spend a lot of money on gas, just given that I do video production for a living and you can't bring the Grand Canyon to you. You have to go to it. So,
Too bad you can't bring the cheap gas to you. That would be...
Well, that's the hope. That is the hope. So we want to look at those things and kind of come through with all of that. And, I'm seeing prices here locally in my neck of the woods, still roughly anywhere from, as low as, $3.22 a gallon, give or take. But I'm also seeing prices as high as like $3.59. And then if I go onto the Illinois side from where I am, you can add exactly. You're exactly right. You can add a lot more to that by 25, 30, 40 cents a gallon, depending upon the location.
And by the way, you're like in the perfect, you're in probably the biggest sweet spot where the state line, and as we take to the road for the summer, this is a great point to bring up again, because you probably have seen or are on the cusp of some of the biggest differences. Because to your point, you cross the line there, and prices can be 365. Some of the counties in southeastern Illinois are even higher than that.
Oh, 379 right now I'm seeing for multiple stations.
In some counties at 390. So, that's a great message for those hitting the road this summer. Do not forget, those state signs, especially if it's Florida in winter, they look really welcoming. You may want a photo. But don't forget that those state lines are also a danger zone for potentially much higher prices.
I have been captive to that many years ago and ended up making that mistake. And, 48 hours ago from where we're recording this now, I was in Illinois and I drove by a station that was at $3.93 a gallon. And I'm like, that just, I almost broke out in a sweat and thought next time you and I record a podcast, I would mention that because it is branded into my brain, considering I paid $3.19 a gallon in Missouri, not 90 minutes before that. So it's a huge difference in all of that. And I actually saw a station in Missouri for $3.15 a gallon and then got mad at myself that I lost 4 cents a gallon, but I'll live. But the reality is, those things do make a difference. As you just mentioned, I am seeing even here in where I'm at $3.14 a gallon. I just, 36 minutes ago, someone just updated a price point there. That's a first. I have not seen anything that low. So maybe prices will start to slowly come back down. And that's a good thing if you have a lot of travel plans, no matter where you are in the country. That's a really good thing because falling prices, especially coordinated with vacation time and travel time, that can help, especially if you've got a long ways to go. You just drove from like Tampa to Chicago not long ago. And, those trips, fuel adds up. I mean, whenever
it does.
A lot very quickly when you're driving
$100 on a trip, before you know it. So.
Yeah, you can afford the extra nice restaurant if you get the cheaper gas. I'm just throwing it out there for your vacations.
Yeah, exactly right. Or you can afford a little bit instead of going to McDonald's, you go to a Chipotle or something.
Exactly.
I also want to bring up another interesting point today because I was outside of the Chicago metro area just a little bit. I was in northern Illinois, close to the Wisconsin line, actually closer to Rockford, which is not too far away for those that know. I think Rockford's about an hour 15.
I've been there.
So, the interesting thing, Matt, is we've talked about summer gas, right? We've talked a lot of different things about gasoline. So Chicagoland uses reformulated gasoline. And basically, let's see here. I'm looking at the county list. So basically, McHenry County, which hugs the Wisconsin state line with Illinois, I went to its neighbor, Boone County, which is one county west. It's a sliver.
It's toward Freeport, Illinois.
Yeah, exactly. It's not quite to Rockford, but Boone County is like where Belvedere is, which is, by the way, where Chrysler, used to have I think still does have a factory. Anyway, so Boone County does not require reformulated gasoline. And as soon as you cross, there's actually a couple travel stops in McHenry County just before you get to Boone. There's a couple big truck stops. Today's price, $4.19. In fact, the price of diesel at those truck stops was below $4 at $3.95. The price of gasoline was about 25 cents higher. So $4.19. But as soon as I crossed into Boone County, where that reformulated gasoline is not required, the price, $3.62.
Oh my goodness.
$4.19 to $3.62, just one county away.
So help me with that. Speaking of Rockford and speaking of that area, if I used, as you know, used to live up in the Chicagoland area, is that is right along the Wisconsin border. If I'm not mistaken, is it Beloit, Wisconsin? That's really just off to the north of Rockford.
Yeah, that's Beloit.
And what is that?
Janesville is up there as well.
I-39? That sounds right. But regardless of what that is, there a gas disparity price, between the Wisconsin and the Illinois border like there is with Missouri and Illinois and Kentucky and Illinois and basically every other state in Illinois? Is it the same situation there?
And by the way, 39 spills into Rockford, and then it's 90. It's one of those weird stretches of 90 where it goes more north than it does west. So, but yeah, there's a lot of oddities there because right now, as I mentioned in Belvedere, I saw a station at 362, and just down the road, I think it's in Riley. I'm quick trying to load here where it is, but it's on I-90. There are a couple travel stops at 419, and then you get into Wisconsin. And if you go, if we look this up really quick and zoom into some of these oddity prices here, you'll find the discrepancy I'm referring to. But then you cross into Beloit, Matt, and there's stations at 325.
Okay, so it is a disparity just like the neighboring states. So Illinois really is that island of high prices all around.
And think about that. If you're somebody that's crossing 90, say you're going from New York to Yellowstone or something, and you're filling up, you're like, oh, Chicago will stop there, stop nearby. You pay $4.19, then you get west of the city, almost to Rockford, it drops to $3.62, and then you head north on 90 through Rockford, cross into Wisconsin, and then you suddenly see stations there, which I'm looking at right now in the Gas Buddy app, 329. By the way, here's another interesting thing, Matt. On the Illinois side is where all the truck stops are. 369 on the Illinois side. There's 4 truck stops right at the last exit in Illinois. But then you head over the Wisconsin state line, 329, literally right across the border if you head into Beloit.
For our friends listening out west and in the eastern part of the country, is there any other state in the union that has such a disparity of gas prices with its neighboring states as Illinois does with its surrounding states?
There's a couple. I'm zooming in because you mentioned the Northeast. Looking at like Hartford and Springfield, Massachusetts, there seems to be a bit of a difference there. Hartford, just kind of zooming in, I'm seeing 370s, 380s, and then Springfield, Massachusetts, seeing some 340s and 350s. The other one that really comes in mind, and if you look at our map, by the way, if you go to gasbuddy.com and load our heat map, you'll be able to see what we're talking about. Matt, the other massive one is on I-10 in California. On the California, now, this is just wild. California side of I-10, 559 at one station, 549 and 539. You cross into Arizona. Have any guesses?
Oh, probably a good $1 cheaper.
$3.59.
Oh my gosh.
$2 cheaper.
Wow. Okay, so in that perspective, Illinois doesn't look nearly as extreme with its neighboring states. Wow.
Everyone that's crossing into California again, Matt. So if you're one that's traveling, say you're going from California to Las Vegas, or you're in the Grand Canyon, you're going back to LAX to fly home or something, you're going to want to be aware of these huge discrepancies. And again, the only real way to do that is to have an app like Gas Buddy or Trek, Google, or Waze. But there's a lot of those.
Yeah, I you've really kind of stunned me in that regard with regard to I did not expect a $2 a gallon price. Now that comes back to the reformulated gasoline, and like the EPA is talking about all the different things that they're wanting to do to help our cleaner air. You and I have talked about this a couple of times. Why on earth are there so many different types of reformulated gasoline when it shouldn't matter if the tailpipe is in Utah or Oregon or New York? It's still exhaust that's coming out, and cumulatively and collectively speaking, as a nation as a whole, it's still exhaust, and it's still, why are there the map of reformulated gasoline is. I mean, that I feel it's
pretty staggering. Yeah.
I feel bad for the refineries, because that's nuts to try to compensate for the different types of reformula. It's not even just, okay, well, St. Louis has reformulated gasoline, but Kansas City doesn't. No, it's not like that. It's like everybody gets a certain kind of reformulated gasoline. Why can't they just go in and say, you know what, from here to here, all 50 states are going to operate with this type of gasoline?
Well, they might be able to do that, but there's also, the difference here, and also worth mentioning, California's difference to Arizona is not just taxes, it's blends. There's a lot of complexities between California and Arizona that cause that. Now, between Illinois and Kentucky, most of it is just taxes. But back to your question, why are you allowed to use gasoline? For example, I filled up in Belvedere today, right? Rockford, not with the reformulated gasoline, but now I live in Chicago. So, what difference does it make? Well, the answer, Matt, is that if you're filling up in Chicago, you're more likely to live in that metro area. And so, yes, you're right. While the majority, you can't eliminate somebody buying gas outside of a required area and then driving through.
Especially if you're on that boundary line with that reformulated gas versus not.
There's kind of no way around it. You're going to fill up generally in the area where you live. And that's why, the rules kind of apply this way, because you're not going to drive 20 miles out of your way to fill your tank up with gas that's, 20 cents, 40 cents cheaper. So that's really the only way it works.
My essential argument is if they're looking for cleaner air and they know for a fact that reformulated gasoline provides that, what difference does it make where the vehicle is located collectively as a nation? It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the Arizona desert and you're the only vehicle around. Your vehicle is started and you're still putting exhaust out the tailpipe.
Right, but you're only one car instead of hundreds of thousands.
But collectively, because that's the language that the EPA uses. They're talking about
looking at the whole picture. To your point, right? They just look at areas that need help. They're not thinking, we don't.
It's a piecemeal approach.
It is. They're saying, well, look at the data in these counties in big cities. They need something different because the system standard is not working. So places like Illinois that have reformulated gasoline in the summer are still the exception. And that's how the EPA handles it. Instead of making everyone use something that may be more expensive, they're singling out the places that have the most problems with air pollution in the warmer months.
Yeah. And so taking, for example, the EPA, obviously clean air, they have just implemented, new clean power rule forcing utilities to take clean energy seriously for energy creation. There are new regulations on the electric industry, the utility industry, with regard to all of that, the fossil fueled power plants and whatnot. Now they're taking an across the country stance on that, where it doesn't matter if the power facility that creates electricity is in the middle of the Arizona desert or in downtown metropolitan area here. They're saying, no, if you're an electric, if you're generating electric, you have to abide by these regulations. That's why I'm asking, why are they not doing that for gasoline? Because I would think that would prevent all of these ups and downs with prices and all this stuff in the spring and fall that we go through every year. And again, I'm naive and I'm asking this as a question more as a recovering reporter than I am anything else at this particular point.
So yeah, Matt, to answer your question, absolutely. We're getting to the point where so many areas have these rules and requirements because so many areas have grown in population over the last couple of decades that, it probably makes sense, instead of adding new places to the list of special gasoline, that maybe they should start to look at a standard, because to your point, it's not really going to hurt using something that emits less air pollution no matter where you are. And because there are so many areas that now opt into this program that covers so many millions of people, it may make sense to start doing it that way. But to this point, that hasn't happened. And so we have all these different hotspots areas, where there are different blends required.
All right. Now, with regard to everything else that we've got going on, the job situation, as far as, the job market is still very hot. Unemployment remains very low. The economy is apparently still doing good. That's why the Federal Reserve is like, we still have an inflation, situation, because the economy just hasn't cooled off. Is that going to put any additional pressure on the price of oil? Because, the economy, it's a weird question to ask, because I know of no one that's saying we need a bad economy. Nobody would want that. But as an economy that's growing, doesn't that add pressure to commodities like gasoline and crude oil and the supply?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could. There's a lot of different things that do impact supply and demand like that in a negative way. And to the point, you always hear politicians complaining about gasoline prices, but they're also, kind of fail to realize that a lot of the policies and regulations can have a negative impact, more so at the state level than the federal level, right? So more so Governor Newsom than President Biden. To your point, a lot of folks kind of forget that and by the way, maybe not even Governor Newsom, but governors ahead of him that basically carved out these rules and regulations, right? California is the only state in the nation where the EPA is superseded by the statewide authority, which is the California Air Resources Board. So there's just so much fragmentation in the system that, you don't really notice it when things are running smoothly, when refineries are churning out gasoline, when there's no refinery issues, the price is normally fine. But when something goes wrong at one refinery that supplies, a couple of these different blends, it can have a domino effect on what prices pay. And that's where politicians, they may write the laws. They don't always understand the intent or what can happen as a result of the laws written.
So the federal chairman, Jerome Powell, I'm going to quote him from the meeting that he held just a little bit ago as of the time of this recording, quote, "Inflation is still too high. Further progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain," unquote. That's not exactly a that's not exactly a go get 'em kind of a comment. We're in great shape. So it almost, the one thing you should never do is overly read into the federal chairman or chairperson's comments, although everyone seems to do so. But it almost sounds like they're really not sure how to fix what they're calling inflation that is too high.
Yeah, that's the other thing, and we've talked about it in a separate earlier podcast too. That it's been remarkable how we went from potentially 3 or 4 interest rate cuts to now having to hold steady, because some of the numbers have been more inflationary. Gasoline being one of them, right? I just mentioned that gas prices are actually 8 cents a gallon above last year. So, it just goes to show that the Fed is going to have to be a little bit more patient for a little longer, and that actually could help undermine the price of oil a little bit more, because a slower economy isn't going to consume as much oil and gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel as an economy that starts heating back up. So it's kind of interesting how that could work to further potentially undermine the price of gasoline.
Yeah, this is certainly an interesting thing all the way around. And that's why, I'm essentially bringing it up and kind of elaborating or attempting to elaborate on it just a touch, because it really truly does have an impact on the price you and I and everyone else that's listening and or watching pays at the pump. And so it's something to really look at and really keep a watchful eye on. The last time that interest rates were this high was just approaching almost 20 years ago, 2006-ish, 2007 range, when interest rates were last this high. And then prior to that, it was right around the turn of the century. I feel very old in saying it that way, but 2001, when the interest rates were actually a little bit higher than that, 6-7%. So it's not completely crazy, but it doesn't sound like they're interested in raising the interest rate more, simply because if I'm reading it correctly, what they're saying, they're not convinced raising the interest rates will do anything to help, which then provides pressure, I would think, on commodities like, oil and whatnot that's out there.
Well, I mean, if I'm trying to recall your last point here, but they're worried about. Say the last point again.
It's a matter of it doesn't look like they're interested in increasing the interest rate anymore. If I'm reading the comments correctly, it doesn't look like they're interested in raising the interest rates anymore, because they are not certain that it will actually help bring inflation down. And this all has a direct impact on things like crude oil because, we're sort of susceptible to that, the crude oil side of things and gasoline.
Yeah, they don't want to raise them further because some of the economic data is saying, hey, you got to be careful here. There's still some part of the data that's inflationary, but I mean, Matt, there's a lot more of a potential slowdown coming still. So the Fed has a very difficult balancing act here, right? They don't want to start cutting because interest rates are not down to their 2% target, but at the same time, they're getting some concerning data. Right. So they're getting it from both sides, which is why this so-called soft landing is going to be ever so impossible or challenging to actually pull off. And that's why the Fed is trying to give the market a little bit more forward thinking or a little bit more transparency and saying, we don't think we're going to have to raise interest rates. But they're also acknowledging that the data exists and they're watching it because it is a little bit hotter than expected. So some of the data is good, some of it's not, and that's why the Fed is holding in the middle. And if that's where the data continues to push them, that could actually continue to weigh on oil prices. That is, if interest rates go up, Matt, that's going to have a negative impact, a downward impact on global commodities because it makes borrowing more expensive. So
right.
That's why interest rates go up, inflation generally goes down because it curbs spending. And so, yeah, I think, at least for now, the price of oil, which can impact inflation. I would say, though, that OPEC is also weighing on the price of oil. That there's a lot of things caught up here and making an impact. But I think for now, as a result of some of this, the Fed is not cutting. So that's bearish for demand. And that's ultimately why also I get some confidence that we potentially have hit our price peak for the spring as well. And keep in mind, I keep saying for the time being, because there is still a very real risk with hurricane season. I think El Nino conditions are going to come back. I think it's El Nino conditions later this year.
What? Yeah, La Nina. One moment. I'll tell you.
Well, it's one of them. Maybe it is.
I believe. Yes, we are moving into a La Nina.
We're in El Nino because it was a warmer winter, and we're going to flip to La Nina later this year.
Which actually could increase the likelihood of hurricanes in the Atlantic hurricane basin. So that's what we're moving to.
Colorado State University, who's one of probably the foremost entities when it comes to forecasting hurricanes, put out their earliest forecast. It's the busiest they've ever seen. They're predicted, that is, for the first forecast of the year that they released. So kind of an ominous sign.
Yeah, it is. And definitely something to keep an extremely watchful eye on because as most people or many people realize, there's a lot of oil infrastructure, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, that is susceptible once that hurricane makes its way into that area. That you got to kind of have to keep a little watchful eye on. And so that can have a direct impact on things, even if it's albeit temporary. That temporary could be several weeks. So that's something to keep a watchful eye on. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, some geopolitical things. I know that you have made some comments like things going on with Israel and other aspects and situations that's going on. It has had a slightly different impact. We're finding out that Israel is sending apparently a delegation to Cairo for a last chance Gaza ceasefire talks. If things are successful in the coming days to halt the fighting in the Gaza Strip. And so far, the Iran and Israel thing seems to just be back down to simmer. Do you see a change in the price for crude?
Well, I think that could be some more downside. That could be part of why, crude oil prices have given up a little bit of ground to begin with, is because partially, we're seeing some improvement in relations there, at least some efforts. And that's, that is pushing less risk as a result. So absolutely, that's something we'll keep an eye on that will probably play a role. If there is a ceasefire, Matt, you could see oil prices giving up maybe another couple dollars a barrel just on the de-escalation in risk. So that's something we'll keep an eye on. Obviously, hurricane season is something we'll keep an eye on here in the next couple of months. But for now, motorists should enjoy the fact that in most areas, gas prices have really started to stabilize, and in some areas prices should start to roll back. And I'm hopeful, Matt, that as the next couple of weeks here, we're getting closer to Memorial Day. Hopefully we'll see more decreases across the country than we will increases.
Absolutely. And that's the hope. That's what we really want to look at and keep a watchful eye on, understandably. So many things taking place there. But, as we're moving closer and closer to Memorial Day and Memorial Day weekend, my fingers are crossed that the prices will not, increase.
Unless there's something, Matt. I mean, your crystal ball is probably as good as mine. But by the way, the EIA report did come out today. There was an interesting tidbit. Refinery maintenance is still ongoing. So that should wrap up here in the next couple of weeks. That does remain a wild card. So in full transparency, that's something that I wouldn't say worries me. It did catch me by surprise, though, that refinery utilization for the week ending the last week of April fell a percentage point. This is the time of year we usually start to see those numbers rise, not fall.
Yeah.
But let's not overshadow the rest of the program. For now, it's looking fairly consistent that the national average may have already peaked, and we could start seeing prices slowly back off.
Yeah, certainly some good news. Well, I'll tell you what, we've had a very interesting podcast, a lot, as always, to discuss, and it changes, and the ebb and flow of how things operate seems to always change, on a weekly basis. So there's so many things out there that can create a direct impact on prices, and thanks for keeping us up to date. I appreciate it. So,
weekend update. Well, until next time, reach us, podcast@gasbuddy.com, questions or ideas for topics down the road. You can see us on social media, X. I'm the Gas Buddy guy. He's Over a Barrel Matt, and the show is Over a Barrel Show. That's also where you'll find us on Facebook, Over a Barrel Show. But for Matt and I, we'll see you here next time.